The period of Angkor is the period in the history of the Khmer Empire from approximately the latter half of the 8th century AD to the first half of the 15th century CE. In any study of Angkorian architecture, the emphasis is necessarily on religious architecture, since all the remaining Angkorian buildings are religious in nature. During the period of Angkor, only temples and other religious buildings were constructed of stone. Non-religious buildings such as dwellings were constructed of perishable materials such as wood, and so have not survived. The religious architecture of Angkor has characteristic structures, elements, and motifs, which are identified in the glossary below. Since a number of different architectural styles succeeded one another during the Angkorian period, not all of these features were equally in evidence throughout the period. Indeed, scholars have referred to the presence or absence of such features as one source of evidence for dating the remains. Periodization. Scholars have worked to develop a periodization of Angkorian architectural styles. The following periods and styles may be distinguished. Each is named for a particular temple regarded as paradigmatic for the style. Priako style. Hariharalaya was the first capital city of the Khmer Empire located in the area of Angkor. Its ruins are in the area now called Droluas, some 15 kilometers southeast of the modern city of Siem Reap. The earliest surviving temple of Hariharalaya is Priako. The others are Bakong and Lolai. The temples of the Priako style are known for the small brick towers and for the great beauty and delicacy of the lintels. Bakeng style. Bakeng was the first temple mountain constructed in the area of Angkor proper north of Siem Reap. It was the state temple of King Yasovarman, who built his capital of Yasodharapura around it. Located on a hill, it is currently one of the most endangered of the monuments, having become a favorite perch for tourists eager to witness a glorious sundown at Angkor. Khmer style. Pre-Rup style. Under King Rajendravarman, the Angkorian Khmer built the temples of Pre-Rup, East Meban and Firemanakas. The common style is named after the state temple mountain of Pre-Rup. Banti Srei style. Banti Srei is the only major Angkorian temple constructed not by a monarch but by a courtier. It is known for its small scale and the extreme refinement of its decorative carvings, including several famous narrative bas-reliefs dealing with scenes from Indian mythology. Kliang style. Bafon style. Bafon, the massive temple mountain of King Udayadityavarman II, was apparently the temple that most impressed the Chinese traveler Zhou Daguan, who visited Angkor toward the end of the 13th century. Its unique relief carvings have a naive dynamic quality that contrast with the rigidity of the figures typical of some other periods. As of 2008, Bafon is under restoration and cannot currently be appreciated in its full magnificence. Classical or Angkor Wat style. Angkor Wat, the temple and perhaps the mausoleum of King Suryavarman II, is the greatest of the Angkorian temples and defines what has come to be known as the classical style of Angkorian architecture. Other temples in this style are Banti Srei and Thomanon in the area of Angkor, and Phai Mai in modern Thailand. Baroque style. In the final quarter of the 12th century, King Jayavarman VII freed the country of Angkor from occupation by an invasionary force from Kampa. Thereafter, he began a massive program of monumental construction, paradigmatic for which was the state temple called the Bayon. The king's other foundations participated in the style of the Bayon and included Ta Prom, Priya Khan, Angkor Thom, and Banti Shma. Though grandiose in plan and elaborately decorated, the temples exhibit a hurriedness of construction that contrasts with the perfection of Angkor Wat. post-Bayan style. Following the period of frantic construction under Jayavarman VII, Angkorian architecture entered the period of its decline. The 13th century terrace of the Leper King is known for its dynamic relief sculptures of demon kings, dancers, and nagas. Materials. Angkorian builders used brick, sandstone, laterite and wood as the materials. The ruins that remain are of brick, sandstone and laterite, the wood elements having been lost to decay and other destructive processes. Brick. The earliest Angkorian temples were made mainly of brick. Good examples of the temple towers of Prioko, Lolai and Bakong at Hariharalaya. Decorations were usually carved into a stucco applied to the brick, rather than into the brick itself. Angkor's neighbor state of Kampa was also the home to numerous brick temples that are similar in style to those of Angkor. The most extensive ruins are at Mai Son in Vietnam. A Cham story tells of the time that the two countries settled an armed conflict by means of a tower-building contest proposed by the Cham king Po Klam Garai. While the Khmer built a standard brick tower, Po Klam Garai directed his people to build an impressive replica of paper and wood. In the end, the Cham replica was more impressive than the real brick tower of the Khmer, and the Cham won the contest. Sandstone. The only stone used by Angkorian builders was sandstone, obtained from the Kulin Mountains. Since its obtainment was considerably more expensive than that of brick, sandstone only gradually came into use, and at first was used for particular elements such as door frames. The 10th century temple of Tarkio is the first Angkorian temple to be constructed more or less entirely from sandstone. Laterite. Angkorian builders used laterite, a clay that is soft when taken from the ground but that hardens when exposed to the sun, for foundations and other hidden parts of buildings. Because the surface of laterite is uneven, it was not suitable for decorative carvings, unless first dressed with stucco. Laterite was more commonly used in the Khmer provinces than at Angkor itself. Structures. Central sanctuary. The central sanctuary of an Angkorian temple was home to the temple's primary deity, the one to whom the site was dedicated, typically Shiva or Vishnu in the case of a Hindu temple, Buddha or a Bodhisattva in the case of a Buddhist temple. The deity was represented by a statue. Since the temple was not considered a place of worship for use by the population at large but rather a home for the deity, the sanctuary needed only to be large enough to hold the statue, a linga. It was never more than a few meters across. Its importance was instead conveyed by the height of the tower rising above it, by its location at the center of the temple, and by the greater decoration on its walls. Symbolically, the sanctuary represented Mount Meru, the legendary home of the Hindu gods. Prang. The prang is the tall finger-like spear, usually richly carved, common to much Khmer religious architecture. Enclosure. Khmer temples were typically enclosed by a concentric series of walls, with the central sanctuary in the middle. This arrangement represented the mountain ranges surrounding Mount Meru, the mythical home of the gods. Enclosures of the spaces between these walls, and between the innermost wall and the temple itself. By modern convention, enclosures are numbered from the center outwards. The walls defining the enclosures of Khmer temples are frequently lined by galleries, while passage through the walls is by way of gopuras located at the cardinal points. Gallery. A gallery is a passageway running along the wall of an enclosure or along the axis of a temple, often open to one of both sides. Historically, the form of the gallery evolved during the 10th century from the increasingly long hallways which had earlier been used to surround the central sanctuary of a temple. During the period of Angkor Wat in the first half of the 12th century, additional half-galleries on one side were introduced to buttress the structure of the temple. Gopura. A gopura is an entrance building at Angkor. Passage through the enclosure walls surrounding a temple compound is frequently accomplished by means of an impressive gopura, rather than just an aperture in the wall or a doorway. Enclosures surrounding a temple are often constructed with a gopura at each of the four cardinal points. In plan, gopuras are usually cross-shaped and elongated along the axis of the enclosure wall. If the wall is constructed with an accompanying gallery, the gallery is sometimes connected to the arms of the gopura. Many Angkorian gopuras have a tower at the center of the cross. The lintels and pediments are often decorated, and guardian figures are often placed or carved on either side of the doorways. Hall of Dances. A hall of dances is a structure of a type found in certain late 12th century temples constructed under King Jayavarman VII. Tarprom, Priya Khan, Banti Kdei, and Banti Shma. It is a rectangular building elongated along the temple's east axis and divided into four courtyards by galleries. Formerly it had a roof made of perishable materials. Now only the stone walls remain. The pillars of the galleries are decorated with carved designs of dancing apsaras. Hence scholars have suggested that the hall itself may have been used for dancing. House of Fire. House of Fire, or Dharmasala, is the name given to a type of building found only in temples constructed during the reign of late 12th century monarch Jayavarman VII, Priya Khan, Tarprom, and Banti Shma. A house of fire has thick walls, a tower at the west end, and south-facing windows. Scholars theorize that the house of fire functioned as a rest house with fire for travelers. An inscription at Priya Khan tells of 121 such rest houses lining the highways into Angkor. The Chinese traveler Zhou Daguan expressed his admiration for these rest houses when he visited Angkor in 1296 AD. Another theory is that the House of Fire had a religious function as the repository, the sacred flame used in sacred ceremonies. Library structures, conventionally known as libraries, are a common feature of Khmer temple architecture, but the true purpose remains unknown. Most likely they functioned broadly as religious shrines rather than strictly as repositories of manuscripts. Freestanding buildings, they were normally placed in pairs on either side of the entrance to an enclosure opening to the west. Sra and Barai. Sras and Barais were reservoirs, generally created by excavation and embankment, respectively. It is not clear whether the significance of these reservoirs was religious, agricultural, or a combination of the two. The two largest reservoirs at Angkor were the West Barai and the East Barai, located on either side of Angkor Thom. The East Barai is now dry. The West Mebon is an 11th century temple standing at the center of the West Barai, and the East Mebon is a 10th century temple standing at the center of the East Barai. The Barai associated with Priya Khan is the Jayutaka, in the middle of which stands the 12th century temple of Nekpin. Scholars have speculated that the Jayutaka represents the Himalayan lake of Anavatapta, known for its miraculous healing powers. Temple Mountain. The dominant scheme for the construction of state temples in the Angkorian period was that of the Temple Mountain, an architectural representation of Mount Meru, the home of the gods in Hinduism. The style was influenced by Indian temple architecture. Enclosures represented the mountain chains surrounding Mount Meru, while a moat represented the ocean. The temple itself took shape as a pyramid of several levels, and the home of the gods was represented by the elevated sanctuary at the center of the temple. The first great temple mountain was the Bakong, a 5-level pyramid dedicated in 881 by King Indravarman I. Other Khmer temple mountains include Bafon, Prerup, Tarkio, Kokur, the Firemanakas, and most notably the Phnom Bakang at Angkor. According to Charles Hyam, a temple was built for the worship of the ruler, whose essence, if a Saivite, was embodied in a linga, housed in the central sanctuary which served as a temple mausoleum for the ruler after his death. These central temples also contained shrines dedicated to the royal ancestors and thus became centers of ancestor worship. Elements. Bas-relief. Bas-reliefs are individual figures, groups of figures, or entire scenes cut into stone walls, not as drawings but as sculpted images projecting from a background. Sculpture in bas-relief is distinguished from sculpture in a relief, in that the latter projects farther from the background, in some cases almost detaching itself from it. The Angkorian Khmer preferred to work in bas-relief, while the neighbors the Cham were partial to a relief. Narrative bas-reliefs are bas-reliefs depicting stories from mythology or history. Until about the 11th century AD, the Angkorian Khmer confined the narrative bas-reliefs to the space on the timpana above doorways. The most famous early narrative bas-reliefs are those on the timpana at the 10th century temple of Ban Tsai, depicting scenes from Hindu mythology as well as scenes from the great works of Indian literature, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. By the 12th century, however, the Angkorian artists were covering entire walls with narrative scenes in bas-relief. At Angkor Wat, the external gallery wall is covered with some 12,000 to 13,000 square meters of such scenes, some of them historical, some mythological. Similarly, the outer gallery at the Bjørn contains extensive bas-reliefs documenting the everyday life of the medieval Khmer as well as historical events from the reign of King Jayavarman VII. The following is a listing of the motifs illustrated in some of the more famous Angkorian narrative bas-reliefs. Bas-reliefs in the timpana at Ban Tsai, the duel of the monkey princes Vali and Sugriva, and the intervention of the human hero Rama on behalf of the latter, the duel of Bhima and Duryodhana at the Battle of Kurukshetra, the Rakshasa king Ravana shaking Mount Kailasha, upon which sit Shiva and his Shakti, Kama firing an arrow at Shiva as the latter sits on Mount Kailasha, the burning of Kandava forest by Agni and Indra's attempt to extinguish the flames. Bas-reliefs on the walls of the outer gallery at Angkor Wat, the Battle of Lanka between the Rakshasas and the Vanarasa monkeys, the court and procession of King Suryavarman II, the builder of Angkor Wat, the Battle of Kurukshetra between Pandavas and Kauravas, the judgment of Yama and the tortures of hell, a churning of the ocean of milk, a battle between Devas and Asuras, a battle between Vishnu and a force of Asuras, the conflict between Krishna and the Asura Banav, the story of the monkey princes Vali and Sugriva. Bas-reliefs on the walls of the outer and inner galleries at the Bjørn, battles on land and sea between Khmer and Cham troops, scenes from the everyday life of Angkor, civil strife among the Khmer, the legend of the leper king, the worship of Shiva, groups of dancing apsaras, blind door and window. Angkorian shrines frequently opened in only one direction, typically to the east. The other three sides featured faker blind doors to maintain symmetry. Blind windows were often used along otherwise blank walls. Colonnettes were narrow decorative columns that served as supports for the beams and lintels above doorways or windows. Depending on the period, they were round, rectangular, or octagonal in shape. Colonnettes were often circled with molded rings and decorated with carved leaves. Corbelling. Angkorian engineers tended to use the corbel arch in order to construct rooms, passageways and openings in buildings. A corbel arch is constructed by adding layers of stones to the walls on either side of an opening, with each successive layer projecting further towards the center than the one supporting it from below, until the two sides meet in the middle. The corbel arch is structurally weaker than the true arch. The use of corbelling prevented the Angkorian engineers from constructing large openings or spaces in buildings roofed with stone, and made such buildings particularly prone to collapse once they were no longer maintained. These difficulties did not, of course, exist for buildings constructed with stone walls surmounted by a light wooden roof. The problem of preventing the collapse of corbelled structures at Angkor remains a serious one for modern conservation. Lintel, pediment, and tympanum. A lintel is a horizontal beam connecting two vertical columns between which runs a door or passageway. Because the Angkorian Khmer lacked the ability to construct a true arch, they constructed the passageways using lintels or corbelling. A pediment is a roughly triangular structure above a lintel. A tympanum is the decorated surface of a pediment. The styles employed by Angkorian artists in the decoration of lintels evolved over time. As a result, the study of lintels has proven a useful guide to the dating of temples. Some scholars have endeavored to develop a periodization of lintel styles. The most beautiful Angkorian lintels are thought to be those of the Prioko style from the late 9th century. Common motifs in the decoration of lintels include the kala, the naga, and the makara, as well as various forms of vegetation, also frequently depicted of the Hindu gods associated with the four cardinal directions, with the identity of the god depicted on a given lintel or pediment depending on the direction faced by that element. Indra, the god of the sky, is associated with east, Jama, the god of judgment and hell, with south, Varuna, the god of the ocean, with west, and Kubra, god of wealth, with north. Stairs. Angkorian stairs are notoriously steep. Frequently, the length of the riser exceeds that of the tread, producing an angle of ascent somewhere between 45 and 70 degrees. The reasons for this peculiarity appear to be both religious and monumental. For the religious perspective, a steep stairway can be interpreted as a stairway to heaven, the realm of the gods. For the monumental point of view, according to Angkor scholar Maurice Glaze, the advantage is clear: the square of the base not having to spread in surface area. The entire building rises to its zenith with a particular thrust.